Hi, welcome. Thank you for coming. I've been invited as possibly the token of the second token radical on the panel, depending on how you see things. So I'm going to speak from that perspective, but by no means, and this will become clear as I'm talking, do I think that there's an either or. Either you make change from the inside or you make change from the outside. I think that's actually a really destructive way of thinking about how social change works and about thinking about how we right injustices in the world. And so I'm going to talk to you about some examples of change from the outside, but what I really would love to see more of is an ecological perspective, sustainability in how we think about social change. So when are the moments and where are the connections and where are the coalitions that we can be building between people who are campaigning for certain kinds of issues and people who have different kinds of powers on the inside as representatives to make change? The second that we begin to see people calling for change on the outside as somehow having different demands and different interests than the people on the inside, we're just reproducing the very problems that are the reasons we have such low voter turnout and such low trust in politicians right now. So today I'm going to talk about the importance of protest and direct action in politics, and I'm going to focus on three challenges that I see as facing young women today, and of course they don't just face young women, but that's who I'm going to speak with at heart. And I'm going to do this in sort of a way where I talk a little bit about histories of struggle and direct action as I'm telling these three stories. And for anyone who's new to this term direct action, what I mean by that is protest that goes directly to the site, to the source of what it's seeking to critique, be that people, governments, corporations. Street protests and direct actions are often what put pressure on Parliament to make policy changes. They are what push debate to their tipping point. The first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is women in rape culture. I'm starting with this issue because it's the hardest one for me to talk about, and it's something that we rarely have the courage to talk about in public, and something that we, especially as women and as young women, face a lot of backlash for merely speaking about. In 2011, a Toronto police officer said that to stay safe, women should avoid dressing like sluts. This prompted the organization of a street demonstration in Canada titled Slut Walk, at which participants wore whatever they pleased, holding placards that read, "My outfit is not an invitation, and my body, my rules." Slut walks became a global phenomenon. They spread from Brazil to Bristol. The one in London had about 3,000 participants. There was, of course, mixed perceptions and mixed reactions to this as a tactic. Is this reifying language of sluts and slags actually perpetuating the problem? Is it using objectification to try to critique objectification? And is this not really the right way to go about the fight? Because of course, these kinds of debates happen within activist circles. But whether you believe in slag reclamation or insist on the defamation of this word, it does not change the reality that according to Rape Crisis UK, as of January 2013, approximately 85,000 women are raped on average in England and Wales every year. Over 400,000 women are sexually assaulted each year, and 1 in 5 women between 16 and 59 have experienced a form of sexual violence in their lifetime, and that's actually estimated to be quite an underreported figure. So recently, people that are critical of sexual assault, which hopefully is all of us in this room, have taken to using the term rape culture. This phrase attempts to name the problem. It recognizes the harrowing truth of those statistics and holds accountable not only the perpetrators of these injustices, but the broader cultures that are responsible for teaching us about sex and desire. If you have never been assaulted, it can be easier to think that rape and sexual assault are something that happen in other people's cultures. But rape and sexual assault are found in every community, from urban India to rural America, from the Tory party to the Socialist Workers' Party, as their recent scandal made very clear. Rape is a reality in all of these cultures, no matter what political positions people espouse. In recent years, we are seeing a mix of traditional and new interventions into rape culture. There continue to be Take Back the Night and Reclaim the Night marches, which perhaps some people in this room have memories of older versions of those. In 2010, a quite creative direct action campaign came from a group called Object of young feminists. They held protests against Tesco's ban on customers wearing pajamas in their shops, on the grounds that how can Tesco say that pajamas are somehow indecent while they openly stock magazines like Nuts and FHM, which are seen to be part of of a kind of rape culture, a sexual objectification of women that distort ideas of consent and sex and desire. So while there is certainly a debate to be had over which of these tactics work and what the best places for intervention actually are, one thing that runs through these women-led protests is creative direct action. These protesters recognize that in addition to policy and legislation, you need to use culture to fight culture. And this is something I think we have a lot to learn from young people about. In recent years, we have seen that digital media can spread hate against women like wildfire, as the recent Twitter attacks on women journalists and bloggers has shown. But digital media also gives us the ability to remix, to memify, to parody, to espouse, to outsmart, as the recent Twitter attacks on women journalists and bloggers has also shown us. Take, for example, the case of Oliver Rawlings, who tweeted abuse at a female academic. Another Twitter user immediately replied to the conversation, saying that she had Oliver's mother's email address. And she suggested that this tweet that Oliver sent be sent to his mother. Seconds later, Oliver tweeted out, "I sincerely apologize for my trolling. I was wrong and very rude. I hope this can be forgiven and forgotten, XX." This is not meant to suggest that we can stop sexual abuse or sexual assault with social media. But what we can do is continue these creative voices that give voice to silence and challenge the cultures of shame that stop us from speaking about sexual assault and rape culture. And I think this is a lesson that we of any gender can learn, and I think a culture that we really need to stop by talking about experiences on all sides and really by being more open about things that happen to us, to those around us. And it's only by recognizing that this is embedded in our culture that we can change it. But we also need things like our dancing new head of prosecutions who has made a promise to change the ways that rape laws work. And I think this is, again, a really good example of that ecological need to build sustainable fights against injustice. So the second thing I'm going to talk about is women and wage inequality. When you're a young woman, it's easy to think that wage inequality is that thing that happens when you grow up. And hopefully that things will change by the time that you have a job where you're even making enough money where you're worried about that wage inequality and not just really excited to be taking home a paycheck, particularly in this economy. I remember when I was university, it felt unfair but seemed like some kind of distant, fuzzy fantasy that was far away from me. But the other week I read a statistic on student debt that was very jostling. The UK government projects that on average it will take 11 years for graduate men to pay off their loans and 16 years for women. 5 more years of work. And that's the lucky few who are able to get jobs. The London Economic Consultancy has estimated that 70 to 80% of women will not be able to pay off their loans at all in the first 30 years after they graduate. Now, some of this disparity is down to women being paid 14.9% less on average than men for doing the same job, and that's according to the Fawcett Society's 2012 figures. But another part of this relates to women being the ones that get pregnant, and more often than men, become primary caregivers for children. Up until 2011, even if men wanted to be the ones caring for their infant children, they were not legally allowed or financially enabled to. And the policy that was put into place in 2011 is making only a slight difference because the ways that it kind of pays out isn't quite enough to be a sort of living, sustainable wage, but that's changing again for 2015. So this change in policy is a perfect example of what we need our government to be doing. But these new policies are not enough. We need to demand more. 2 important struggles that were fought during the women's liberation movement in the UK in the 1970s and in the 1980s were the Wages for Housework campaign and campaigns for subsidized childcare in workplaces. In the early 1970s, Selma James and the Wages for Housework campaign argued that running a home should be recognized as work in official statistics, and that people doing this labor should be paid a wage. not accounting for housework as labor contributed to the skewed vision of the costs of raising a family, and painted an unrealistic picture of what it really costs us to work and to live. And linked to this, the demand for subsidized childcare to be available in all workplaces is another issue that concerned feminists in this time period. If the working world was serious about accepting women as equals, this would mean more than just offering them a position. It would mean offering them the conditions that make work possible. Today, on-site childcare is only available in 3.8% of UK workplaces. Where childcare is available, costs often remain so high that for many families, it is not economically viable for underpaid women to continue to work full-time. Rather than having their parenthood integrated into the working world and recognized as an integral part of life, parents today find themselves in a constant balancing act, never feeling like they are doing enough either at work or at home. Alongside equity in work conditions, affordable childcare, and holistic approaches to family life, these other kinds of demands must go back onto the political agenda. And I think that it's going to take direct action and protest in addition to policy to get us there. The final thing I'm going to talk about briefly is the question of women and leadership. We often hear we need more women leaders, and of course on Parliament Week we hear we need more women in Parliament, which I think we do. As of February 2013, the UK had 22.5% of its parliamentary seats held by women, as Heather quoted to us before. In the ranking I was looking at, we were not 58th, but in fact 65th in the world, out of 190 countries. So if you think about how the UK espouses to be a democratic leader, I would take that statistic quite seriously as a concern. There is a woman who has done a lot of protesting in her life named Starhawk. And with a name like that, I'm sure you won't be surprised to learn she lives in California. She writes that there are different kinds of leaders. There are leaders who seek power over, and there are leaders who seek power with. For democracy to function, we should always be fostering leaders that seek power with. But in a culture of representational democracy and workplace hierarchies, in which we have managers for the managers of our managers, how do we learn to lead together with others? This is where being involved in protest can offer a lot of skills and a lot of insight. And I agree, surprisingly, she says, with our Tory representative here, that it is very important to have other kinds of work, whether waged or unwaged, whether campaigning or in other workplaces, in order to learn these skills. So when we organize campaigns from the bottom up, or from what we call the grassroots, often no one is the boss. We have to figure out what roles make sense and who is good at doing what on our own. There is no job description or brief. You learn to make it up as you go along. You learn how to lead together. It's like group work without any marks or salary bonuses, where the motivation to get stuff done has to come from wanting to accomplish a common goal together. Sharing that common goals with others helps navigate the hard parts of working together, and when it works, it's really a beautiful thing. After the London riots in August of 2011, I worked with a group of 30 people from all different cultures and backgrounds in my local borough of Hackney. Together we planned a Give Our Kids a Future march, demonstrating against the youth center closures and the austerity cuts that were ripping through our neighborhoods. In a matter of 3 days, on a £0 budget, we mobilized 3,000 local residents onto the streets. That was the little p politics, and that was the magic of protest. Another important thing for learning how to lead is not being afraid of your own voice. This is one of the greatest things about protest. It can turn the shyest, quietest person you ever met into a shouter. In the 1980s, when tens of thousands of women went to Greenham Common to protest against nuclear cruise missiles, many of them had never been to a demonstration or a march before. In their memoirs, these women talk of finding their voices at Greenham, of discovering their strength. They chanted, they sang, they keened. They locked their bodies to post, they barricaded roadways, and they cut down fences with bolt cutters. I remember the first time that I found my voice as a leader, long before I had ever heard of Greenham Common, before I gave lectures or public speeches, and it was back in Canada where I was living before I moved here to the UK. And a group of us had assembled for a protest against the privatization of our university. We started the day with a teach-in, to be followed up by a demonstration outside the building where corporate leaders were making investment plans, so kind of corporatization of university stuff that we see happening here in force. When it came time to move everyone from the teach-in to the demonstration outside the building, without even realizing I had done it, I was up on top of a chair, and I was using my big loud projection voice that I didn't really know that I had. And I was hailing everyone. All right, we need to move downstairs, and we need to stay calm, and we need to stay together, and we need to end up over here. I gave directions, I got down off that chair, and I moved, taking my power with them. The moment I stood in that chair changed my life. I heard a voice of leadership, and I couldn't believe that it was my own. That day also came to mark the first of a long list of buildings, including Parliament, that I'm very proud to stand here and say I've been kicked out of. Most importantly, it taught me the greatest lesson we can learn about women in democracy and the power of little p politics. Protest is not for women who are brave and strong. Protest is what makes women brave and strong. So as it's Parliament Week, I'd like to leave on this thought. I very much agree with everyone else here that we need to work on and strategize together on how to get more women into Parliament. However, I also think we need to identify and act on those issues that sometimes demand we work together to get more women kicked out of Parliament. Thank you.